But today I just wanted to focus this mini lecture on the iconography of Jesus Christ, because I think that that is something that we don't often talk about, and I think it's important to realize how the image of Christ has evolved into the current kind of image that we all recognize within popular culture and sometimes within our own cultures. So this is what we'll be doing today. I wanted to start by talking about early Christianity. So it's important to note that Christianity and Judaism both existed during the Holy Roman Empire alongside other polytheistic religions. So that is to say that these existed alongside religions with multiple gods these were often pagan religions. So if we think of Greek and Roman gods, this is the kind of the religions that we're thinking about at this early period. So it's important to realize as well that Christianity was not actually realized as a Roman religion until 313 of the Common Era. And that is because in 313 we have the fellow represented here. This is the Emperor Constantine. He signed the Edict of Milan. So this is basically the document that made it legal to practice Christianity, but because before 313 it was not legal, it was frowned upon, and sometimes action would be taken for people who were practicing Christianity. So many people who practiced Christianity at this time actually practiced it in silence, in the privacy of their own home. Oftentimes there were underground kind of church structures that people would go and worship in the name of Christianity, because it was not the sanctified religion of the Roman Empire until 313. So in 313 this happens, and that causes some big changes. And so all of a sudden we have Christian imagery and Christian art. So two themes that we often see in early Christian art are, one, the narrative image. So that is basically the recounting of historical events from the Bible. So oftentimes we'll see biblical stories. And the second most kind of common theme we see in Christian art is the iconic image. So this is basically images of expressions of tangible concepts, ideas that are otherwise would be seemingly intangible. So to start with kind of the story of the iconography and the changing iconography of Christ, I wanted to start in Dura Europos. This is an ancient city. There's, as you can see, kind of just a bunch of ruins now. But this is in Syria, and we're going to go all the way back to 244 of the Common Era. Now notice this is before Christianity was made legal, and so at this time people practiced Christianity in private and in secret. So here at Dura Europos you have a Jewish synagogue. You also have a Christian church house underground and some shrines to Persian cults. Also a few temples to Greek gods, Zeus and Artemis. So you have a range of kind of different religious interests at the site. But we're going to actually go to the Christian church house into the baptistry. So this is I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. This is a reconstruction of what it would have been like in a local museum in Syria, in the National Museum. So it's a reconstruction. It's right there. So if you move here and you look right above, this would have been a place for baptisms, kind of a bath. If you look right above it, you see what we call a lunette. And within the semicircle, we have an image. And so what do you see here? Well, it looks like a man who's holding some sort of sheep, and then there also seems to be some sort of flock of sheep here. And so basically this is an early image of Christ, but it's actually Christ as the Good Shepherd. But it's important to note, right, at this time, Christianity is still not legal. So images like this were actually really smart. So here's a question that I have that I might pose for you, is why is the image of Christ as the Good Shepherd, a very smart symbol for early Christians to use in the Roman Empire? Well, there's a few reasons for this. One reason is that the shepherd has a long history within Greco-Roman pictorial conventions. It's often tied to salvation, right? You often have the shepherd as the leader who saves lost sheep. He rescues lost sheep. So this is an iconography that is much broader than the one that is used just to signify Jesus Christ as the shepherd. And it's also the image of the shepherd is not emphatically Christian, right? We know that overall, there's loads of shepherds within pagan religions. So if someone were to enter this kind of church space before the religion was legal, people wouldn't really get in trouble for having images like this on the walls, because they wouldn't be, because they could claim that it was a pagan god, because there were a series of pagan gods who were also shepherds. So here we have a few, and this is what we call syncretism. So syncretism, this is a term in your book, so make sure that you note that, and your book might offer a nice definition as well. So this is when artists assimilate images from other traditions, whether consciously or unconsciously, and give them new meaning. So basically the image of the Good Shepherd, the iconography of the Good Shepherd, was assimilated from one tradition to another, from the pagan tradition to the tradition of Christianity. For instance, here we have the shepherd again, but here are two examples where we see sculptures of pagan gods. So here we have Hermes, who is also represented as a shepherd, and then we have Apollo, who's always often represented with sheep. Orpheus is another one of these gods who's oftentimes represented in just the same manner as the shepherd. So really, it's really smart to use images like this in this syncretic manner, because this way early Christians couldn't get in trouble, but also because once it's legalized to practice Christianity in 313, this made it quite easy for Christians, for people who practice pagan religions to make the switch to Christianity, because the iconography was the same. So Christ was the shepherd for Christianity, but the image of the Good Shepherd as linked to salvation was already an image and already an iconography that people who practiced pagan beliefs could already kind of get behind. So there's a couple of reasons why this is really smart. And this is the early image of Christ, right? He's given up all of his earthly belongings. He's leading the flock. So as we have the signing of the Edict of Milan in 313, we have a huge influx of people who are converting to Christianity. And so these people need a place of worship. So basically, this is where we see early basilica designs coming from. So people who practiced Christianity wanted the design of the basilica to be completely different from classical temples. The basilical plan was used for public buildings to provide a base. So here you see the basilica, which is a drawing for Old St. Peter's in Rome. And this is actually now is in the Vatican, in the Vatican City. And you might not know this, but the Vatican, just a side note, the Vatican City is actually its own country. So if you were to say that the Vatican is in Italy, if you were to say that this church, for example, is in Italy, you'd actually have to say, well, no, it's actually in the Vatican, because Vatican City is its own country. Anyway, that's a different point. But here you see the setting out of this new basilica plan where people could come and worship one God all together. Of course, this early plan had wooden ceilings, so it actually burnt down. But nonetheless, it paved the way for plans of basilicas to come. And here you see, this is very common to have a courtyard, a central aisle that we call a nave, and then at the end of that aisle you have what we call an apse. the semicircular place where you often have an altar of some sort. And here we have double aisles to make room for everybody who would enter into the church to pray and to worship. And here's the contemporary Basilica of St. Peter's in the Vatican. And I actually took these pictures. It's massive. You can actually see just how, just how big this is. To give you an example, these letters that you see up here that I'm pointing to correspond with these letters up here. And these are actually 12 feet tall. So just to give you an idea of just how huge this is, those tiny letters up there are actually 12 feet tall. So it's actually just a massive, amazing, gigantic space for worship in the Vatican. I also wanted to move us briefly to Ravenna to talk about the ways in which we see Christ, the image of Christ, changing. So here we have the Emperor Justinian, who was a very important emperor at this time. He is so he was one of the emperors that kind of changed the focus in Rome from in Italy of the Holy Roman Empire from Rome to Ravenna, which is a city that's northeast of Rome. It's on the eastern coast of Italy. So he moved everything there, but then he actually never lived there, never visited. So it's kind of interesting, and we see that happening quite often. So the images we're going to look at in just a second are made of mosaics. Mosaic is a very common medium at this time. It's made up of these small stones. You can see here in this image, you can see how mosaic is used very nicely. These stones are called tesserae, and they're often colored with different colors, as you can see here, and then placed together to create value, shadow, and design. They were a popular decorative element for Roman villas, in floors especially, but the Romans rarely used it on their walls. So this was actually kind of revolutionary to see Justinian decorating this important church with Byzantine mosaics. So here's what the church looks like on the outside. It's pretty quiet, but it doesn't seem super crazy. Again, it's a centralized plan. We've talked about this a little bit before, where we have the entrance of the church, and then at center, you basically have to walk around the outside of a central dome, and then here is the nave, and it ends with the apse. So we're going to actually look right in here at the apse itself. So if you were to move into this this altar space and look up, here's where we're looking, where we have this beautiful mosaic with a figure, a prominent figure in the center. And so I've zoomed into it right here. So who do you think this might be? Well, hopefully you think correctly. This is actually an image of Christ. But notice how he looks different, right? He doesn't look like the starving shepherd anymore. What's different here? Well, when I asked my other class that I was teaching today, they said, well, he looks like a king, right? And he really does. He's decked out in purple and gold. These are colors that are reserved for royalty. And so he takes he kind of takes on the role of a Holy Roman Emperor. Here he's youthful. And so when you think about Christ within your own kind of image in your head, you often don't think of him like this, right? He's oftentimes older than this. But this Christ is clean shaven. He's got short hair. He looks like an emperor. He's sitting on this orb, which is an image that which signifies that he is all powerful over the entire globe. And so here we have all sort of signifiers of power, but most importantly, I want to get at kind of his youthful mode of representation, and the fact that he's represented as a Holy Roman Emperor and not a god necessarily. All right, and then as we move on, I want to think a little bit more about how images of Christ and saints were actually destroyed around this time as well. So here's a series of icons. These are what we call icons. which would have usually been kind of small little paintings that one could bring with wherever they went to make sure they could always worship. And so there's thousands of these that exist, more than thousands of these that exist. But what's the problem with this? Well, icons were often venerated by the faithful. That is to say that they were often prayed to and worshipped just as though they were a god themselves. So this became a problem because devotees believed that they could communicate with their saint or with whoever was pictured through the image itself. And so this is why we have a movement called iconoclasm in the 700s. Iconoclasm basically means image breaking. It was the prohibition and destruction of artworks used for religious purposes. It was created by Emperor Leo III in 726 through 730, and there's a few reasons why this happened, why people started destroying images like this, like these, right, like these. These all still exist. That's why I'm able to show them to you today, but many of the images just like these were actually destroyed. And the first reason, which I've already touched on, is that people feared that people would that people would worship their icons to the extent where they would stop worshiping actual gods and saints, right? So that's a problem. The other reason is because at this time we have a decline in the Roman Empire, and many people blamed this on the idea that God was unhappy with the way in which people worshipped icons. And so that's another reason to break all icons. The third reason, and this is more political, was because the power of the monasteries was becoming too grand. Monasteries were becoming very powerful. People within the church were becoming even more powerful than emperors. And of course the emperors did not like this. And so this was one way for them to make sure to take some power away from the monasteries and away from churches by trying to outlaw the use of icons and other images. And here you have just a manuscript, an image from a manuscript by a person who actually wanted to save images. So people are on two sides of the spectrum here. We have the iconoclasts, the destroyers of the images, and then we have the iconophiles, who are the lovers of images. Here you see an image of a man with an image of God, or an image of Jesus, about to dip it into whitewash, to completely destroy it. And the people who made this book, who made this manuscript image, are noting that to dip an image of Christ into a whitewash and to destroy it is just the same as crucifying Christ again. So it's quite important here. People were very passionate about this. And now I want to look at a map real quick and think about the Holy Roman Empire. So here we have Rome, and then we talked about Justinian moving the capital up to Ravenna. But then we also had the capital coming over to Constantinople, modern-day Turkey, for a while. But then it's important to note that there's another important monastery at Mount Sinai all the way down here. So look at just how far away this is and how much one would have to travel to get to Mount Sinai. The reason this is important is because, as I said, there's this important monastery there at Mount Sinai in the middle of the mountains, very isolated, which housed a lot of icons which have been saved today. And so we find, if you go there, you find the largest collection of icons here at the monastery of St. Catherine. And here's the librarian who, this is Father Justin, he's the librarian who takes care of this collection today. And basically there's all sorts of icons here. Because of the remote location of Mount Sinai outside of the Roman Empire, it was much harder for people, iconoclasts, people who wanted to destroy images, to make their way here to actually destroy the images. So it's for, we benefit now because there's this amazing collection off in the middle of the mountains in Mount Sinai. This is one of the important icons that was saved at Mount Sinai, and I want to talk about it a little bit because I think it's fascinating. It's not in your book. But if you look at this image of Christ, what do you notice? So think about it just a little bit. If you were in class with me, I had one of my students today say, "Oh, it seems off balanced," or "It just seems kind of weird. Like his hair is fluffy on this side and smooth on this side. He's got this arched eyebrow only on one side. His eyes seem fiery red. There's more shadow on one side. It just seems like the artist didn't quite get it right." Well, believe it or not, this is kind of this is supposed to be exactly like this for a reason. And this is here, and I also want to mention this is where we really have the formation of Christ as a type. So when you think of Christ, this is probably the Christ that comes to mind for you today. And it starts all the way back here with icons like this, dating back to the 6th century. So here you have a halo. You have dark long hair and a beard. This is very common. The hand gesture, which is one of blessing. We've got the scripture. Again, he's got the purple garments and gold garments, but basically relate to his status as royal and important. And this is what we call Christ Pantocrator, or otherwise known as the ruler of all, the King of glory. But the reason why we have this kind of odd representation of Christ where it seems to be off, it seems like unbalanced, is because this image is actually supposed to show us the two sides of Christ. So if we were to cover up, actually you can do this on your screen right now, if you were to cover up the right side of Christ and just look at the left side of his face, you'd see that it's very serene. If you were to cover up the opposite side, you'd see that it looks actually very angry. And so I'm going to show you this image to kind of help you out. This is a contemporary technology has allowed us to kind of cut the image in half and flip it so that you can see what the image would look like if both sides were the same. So this is the left side, right? And we see this very serene, forgiving, loving Christ. And then on the other side, we see Christ who's angry, right? His hair is standing on its ends. His eyes are dark. He's angry. His eyebrows are arched. He looks down at us and he judges us. And so this is important, and this was completely supposed to be like this, is that the artist decided that they wanted to show the two sides of Christ. One who is forgiving, loving, and the other who is, will judge you someday. And so this is really important, and it's kind of interesting here that we see this out in this important icon from the 6th century. And lastly, I wanted to show you the image of Christ that perhaps comes to mind for many of you now. I know this image actually is the most mass-produced image of Christ ever created. It was created in 1941, and in fact, I was raised when I was a child as a Catholic, and my grandparents had this image framed above their kitchen table. And so I actually remember it as a child, and when I was thinking about images of Christ, I thought, oh my gosh, I remember that one, and then lo and behold, it's actually the most mass-produced image, and here it's created in 1941, so it's actually quite a recent image. But think about what Christ looks like here. Does he look like a Saudi Arabian man? No, he doesn't, right? But we know, the Bible tells us that he is actually from Saudi Arabia. So by all means, he should be much browner, right? But instead, he has this light blonde hair, blue eyes here, a lighter skin tone. He's completely anglicized, right? And so this is just the way that the iconography of Christ changes over time and how people use it for their own benefit. And so this is kind of the image that stuck for many people in 1941, where we have this very light, very kind of Anglo Christ, even though we know that Christ is from the Middle East. But anyway, that's where I'm going to stop today. That I've actually gone on long enough. But this is kind of the iconography of Christ, right? We start with the shepherd, and then we move towards the young, youthful Christ as kind of an emperor. And then we move to Christ as the Pantocrator, someone who will judge us. And then here we have the serene Christ, the anglicized, kind of lighter Christ, who we all kind of think of perhaps today. So I hope that kind of helps you, and I hope you let me know if you have questions, and I will talk to you soon.